So when it comes to budget fitness watches, there's stuff we should expect like a touchscreen, notifications, a heart rate sensor, step tracking, sleep tracking, and probably even GPS for tracking outdoor activities. But this watch hits a little bit different where this also has a speaker and microphone. It has up to about a week or so of battery life, an altimeter, offline maps, and even a sapphire lens. And quite simply, there's really nothing else on the market that comes even close to offering these kinds of features for the money. Now, when something like this promises so many features for this kind of price, I think we all start to have questions like, do those features actually work? How accurate is that heart rate sensor? How's the sleep tracking? Is it actually accurate for tracking outdoor activities? And ultimately, is this a good, reliable watch? Well, that's exactly what we're going to answer in this video. So if you've been a subscriber to my channel, you know that I test these kinds of devices extremely thoroughly, where I use these watches for stuff like running, cycling, weight training, high intensity interval training, and just everyday use to see if they really work so you can get an idea if these are right for you. And I did the same thing, of course, in this video, but something I had to keep in the back of my mind the entire time testing it is that $129 price tag. And heck, there's even a cheaper version at $99. And no watch is perfect, of course, so there's good things about it as well as things that need work, but considering the price tag, I was really on the lookout for any red flags or showstoppers. I mean, at $129, it's almost too low that it kind of makes us pause for a second and ask, what exactly is the catch here? So I'll be going over everything good about this watch, and there are some really good things about it, as well as all the quirks that you need to know as well. And if you do find the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and just hit that like button down below. It's a small thing that you can do that'll help this video and the channel out quite a bit, and I appreciate it. So there's two different versions of the Active 2. So there's a premium version that runs $129, and then there's a less expensive model for $99. And the premium version comes with a sapphire lens. There's two watch straps, so there's a faux leather band as well as a silicone band. And then the premium version also comes with contactless payments that are available in the EU. Other than that, the standard version and the premium version are basically identical in terms of features. But for that 30 extra bucks, that's kind of a steal for the addition of the sapphire lens, which is just going to be a lot more worry-free than the tempered glass lens on the standard version. Plus you get the extra band. And then when it comes to looks, so just like the feature set, I think this looks a lot nicer than what we'd expect from a $130 watch. It has nice clean lines to it, and I think that stainless steel bezel looks really good with those little tick marks as well. And I've definitely given Amazfit a bit of flack on some of their designs on some of their other watches, but I think they kind of nailed it with this one, so good job there. Now, one thing I really appreciated about this watch while testing it was just how comfortable it is. So it has a 44mm case, which is kind of a nice middle of the road size, and it fit me well, at least on my 185mm circumference wrist. And another reason it's so comfortable is just how thin and light it is, where it's less than 10mm thick and it weighs just around 30 grams or so. So this was great all throughout the day. It was really good through sports, and it was also super comfortable at night during sleep since it's so thin. So to get around the device, it has a touchscreen display along with two physical buttons. So the 1.32-inch display is a good display where it gets plenty bright with a peak brightness of 2000 nits. There's tons of colors as well as tons of contrast. It's basically the kind of display that we expect out of a smartwatch these days. And seeing it outdoors is good here as well, where that peak brightness is plenty good enough to see it even in the brightest sun. Now, this watch also has an ambient light sensor, which is supposed to adjust brightness in different conditions, but I didn't really find it to be all that responsive, and this is both outdoors as well as indoors. Like outdoors, even if I'm in the brightest sun, it doesn't really seem to get all that much brighter. And then indoors, it does seem to work a little bit better at lowering the brightness, like at night, but I didn't really find it to be all that responsive. So having both physical buttons as well as a touchscreen are nice to have, especially during workout scenarios where our hands can be sweaty, but you still do have to rely on the touchscreen to do things on the device. So by default, the upper button opens up the list of apps and also serves as a back button. And then the lower button is set to open up your workout list, but you'll still use the touchscreen to scroll through menus as well as tap on the screen to do stuff like start a workout. And the touchscreen is super responsive, but I'd almost say too responsive at times. And that was mainly when I was swiping and scrolling, where it was kind of like too fast and a little bit too sensitive. But I didn't necessarily experience any accidental touches or swipes or anything like that when I got wet, like in the shower. I did notice one sort of odd thing about the interface though during workout. So if the display isn't active where it's either dimmed or off, you kind of have to do this double press thing to kind of wake up the watch. And it's just kind of weird during workout. So if I want to pause a workout, what I do on pretty much any other watch is I just press the pause button and it pauses. But with the Active 2, if the display isn't active where it's off or dimmed, pressing the pause button just kind of wakes up the display. It doesn't actually pause the workout, and I kind of have to press it again to pause the workout. And the same thing goes for pressing the lap key during strength training workouts. So if the display isn't active, you kind of have to first press the lap button to wake it up and then press it again to switch between sets or rest periods. And that's just not really the behavior I think we kind of expect for watches with buttons, where when you press the button, it kind of does the thing. Now, when it comes to smartwatch features, so for notifications, you'll be able to receive notifications for calls, texts, as well as apps, whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone. However, when it comes to responding to texts and calls, there will be a difference depending on whether or not you have an iPhone or an Android phone, where with an iPhone, you can receive text, but you won't be able to respond. And that's just due to Apple locking down iMessage or reply functionality to just Apple Watches. And that's very much the same as pretty much every other non-Apple Watch brand out there. But with the Android phone, you will be able to respond with quick responses. You can also type out a message with an on-screen keyboard. You can send emojis. There's even stuff like smart replies that are kind of like AI generated responses, which actually seem to be appropriate. And then you can also use voice dictation, which also seem to work well. And then it even has a built-in microphone and speaker. So here's where you can take calls on the watch itself. And you can do this with both an Android phone as well as an iPhone. So there's actually no difference there, but you still do have to have your phone paired and in range since this doesn't have LTE. And the quality of the speaker isn't bad. So speakers on watches can sometimes sound tinny, but it's actually kind of acceptable on this. And they also utilize the speaker in other areas like audible cues for laps during a workout, as well as even the workout where you can speak out a summary after you're done.
Calories, 908 kilocalories. Average heart rate, 139.
So there's also the Zep Flow feature, which is basically kind of like a voice control feature for your watch, where you can do stuff like start a timer, start a workout, and other stuff like that. But do note that you do have to have your phone paired and in range. So all this processing doesn't actually happen on the watch itself. And the Active 2 doesn't have any onboard music storage or playback features or anything like that, but you can still control the music playing on your phone. And then when it comes to battery life, so they claim that you can get up to 10 days of battery life with what they call a typical usage scenario, and then up to 5 days with heavy usage. So for me, I wanted to test all the things, of course. So I turned basically everything on, including the always on display. And I found that 5-day mark to be pretty close for that heavy usage scenario. I've been consistently getting at least 4 days, and that was more when I was doing more outdoor activities, all the way up to 6 days at times when I was more hunkered down inside, which it's winter right now. So I was getting more on that 6-day mark. So those numbers do seem to line up though. And then when it comes to charging, so it uses this little magnetic puck charger type thing, and then you'll attach that to a USB-C cable. But just know that it does not come with the actual cable itself. But being that many of us already have tons of cables laying around, I'm okay with that. However, it isn't the same charging puck though as their T-Rex 3, since that's a larger watch. So a little bit of a bummer there if you were to, let's say, have your T-Rex 3 for sports and then have this watch for everyday use. You would have to have different chargers. For health and activity tracking, so it has a heart rate sensor, it tracks your calories, steps, floors climbed, it can track your blood oxygen saturation levels, and it can even track your skin temperature while sleeping. And we'll get into the heart rate accuracy in just a bit when we talk about the fitness features, but let's first talk about the sleep tracking. So the Active 2 will give you a sleep score, and it can also track your sleep stages. And in general, it does a good job at detecting when I went to bed as well as when I woke up. There was one morning though, however, where it didn't detect when I actually woke up and had me waking up a couple hours later. But interestingly, it did detect that awake time though. But when it comes to these sleep scores, so I find that Amazfit sleep scores don't really change all that much from night to night, where they're kind of capped at both ends, where I basically have a range from anywhere from like 73 to 95. But on the majority of the nights, it has me in like the 80s, where my actual feeling can fluctuate anywhere from like the low 50s all the way up to 90s. And that also compares to my Oura Ring. And how we actually feel the next morning is really probably the most important factor, where we need to listen to our bodies, but the sleep score doesn't really reflect that, at least for me. Now, I did actually receive a 66 one night. However, that was the night that we saw before where it didn't detect when I actually woke up. So I guess it can dip below a 70, but that wasn't actually an accurate night of sleep tracking. And along with sleep tracking, the Active 2 provides you with a readiness score every morning, and this score represents your physical and mental readiness each day based on multiple factors, including the quality of your sleep, your HRV, heart rate, blood oxygen saturation levels, as well as your respiration rate. But just like their sleep scores, their readiness scores are also kind of capped at both ends, where the lowest score I got was an 80, and on almost all days it had me in the high 80s and a lot of time in the 90s, even with a poor night's sleep the night before, as well as a lot of workouts the day before that kind of crushed me. And the insights are also a little bit funny here too, where like on this morning it says I have an 88, but it still says I should take it easy because of a slightly lower HRV, but my HRV was right at baseline, so I'm not really sure why it thinks my HRV was actually lower than usual. And this also seems to translate to the recovery score, where it doesn't really matter how hard my workouts were the day before or how well I recovered. But what's kind of interesting is the actual data, like my resting heart rate, my heart rate variability, as well as the time I slept, are in general in line with other trackers I use. It's just more that the feedback that it provides from that data in regards to sleep score as well as readiness don't seem to be all that useful. So it doesn't really seem to be about bad data. It's just more about the algorithms that need some overhauling to provide more meaningful feedback. But then when it comes to sports features, so for the kinds of activities that you can track, so the Active 2 basically comes with everything. And I mean basically everything that you can think of, whether that's the common stuff like running, there's cycling, pool swimming, open water swimming, there's even triathlon, there's tons of gym profiles including strength training, there's a bunch of outdoor recreation profiles including skiing and snowboarding, and then there's even some less common profiles that you definitely will not see in other watches, like a lot of dance profiles and yes, even hula hooping. And sorry, I definitely did not test that profile. I mean, I don't own any hula hoops. And then they even just recently added High Rock Sport profiles, which is kind of the latest rage, which is definitely kind of perked my interest. More details on that soon. But what's nice about these sport profiles is that they aren't just different ways of naming or classifying your workouts. Many of these have specific information based on a particular sport profile. So for instance, with stuff like running, it provides cadence, stride length, and even running power. And then for weight training, there's rep counting, automatic exercise detection, as well as the ability to enter different weights for each set. And then for stuff like skiing, it can automatically track your runs based on information from the barometric altimeter. And then in terms of the accuracy of more of that specialized data, so for running power, that seems to correlate fairly well with the same kind of number that Garmin provides. However, you'll notice that it isn't as responsive though, where it's not tracking the high and low points, where it's more of a constant throughout the entire run. And then for weight training, it does a good job at rep counting, where it was almost always spot on, if not maybe just like one rep off here or there. I also found the exercise recognition to be surprisingly good here, and the reason I say surprising is that I don't generally see watches do well here in regards to detecting the actual exercise that I'm doing. Like for this workout, I did 5 pretty common movements and it was pretty consistent, but for some reason it did miss the boat on the bicep curls, which are part of their list of movements that it should recognize. But still, I'd have to say that these results for both rep counting as well as the exercise recognition are actually better than what I've seen from some other brands. And then for all workouts, in addition to stuff like calories burned, it'll also track your training load. So this is basically the amount of cardiovascular load each workout has in terms of the time spent in different heart rate zones. Now, their numbers for training load are quite a bit higher though than what other wearables deliver when it comes to this particular calculation. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation with some other brands, but the trends do still seem to line up, which is ultimately what we actually use training load for, is to track our longer term training trends. Now, for probably one of the more unbelievable features this watch has for the money, this also has offline maps, which is kind of crazy for this price. So this is where you can download maps to the watch itself so you can have context of your location while you're doing your outdoor activity. And these maps are really good maps, by the way, where they even have labels for streets and trails. And then in addition to all that, you can also do navigation with a preloaded route. It's basically the same as their T-Rex 3, which was again already a great deal at double the price. And then the actual process for downloading these maps is also really convenient, where you can download smaller chunks of map files to the watch, which is a pretty quick process. But one thing I do have to note is that the Active 2 has a rather small amount of storage, so you will be limited to the amount of maps that you can actually have on the watch at one time. But when I say a small amount of storage, it's a small amount. Like, in fact, I couldn't even update the watch with a software update at one time because I had too many activities and map files on the watch. So I actually had to clear up some space from the device to perform the update. And when it comes to GPS accuracy for tracking outdoor activities, it did a decent job for me on all my rides and runs when it comes to the total distance, and it compared well against tons of other devices. And I'll also add that it's pretty decent at getting a satellite signal when you first go to start an activity, where it usually takes about 5 to 10 seconds or so to get a satellite fix. And then for the finer details of the actual GPS track, so for running, it was great, right in line with all the other devices and no issues there. Now, when it comes to cycling, so on all the straight sections, it did a fantastic job. However, I noticed that on higher speed curves and corners, it has a tendency of overshooting some of these, where you see it kind of goes wide and isn't as detailed as the other devices. It's not like it ever translated into like really bad distances or anything like that, but it's just on higher speed corners and curves and may not be exactly on the path that you took. Now, when it comes to to altimeter accuracy in regards to tracking elevation gain. So this is kind of interesting where the elevation gain collected from the Active 2 itself was always pretty close to other devices as well as the corrected elevation figure from Strava. However, I noticed this absolutely crazy elevation gain on one ride where it said I had a 376,000 feet of elevation gain with a minimum elevation of 11 miles below the Earth's surface. What I noticed is that they have this altitude calibration function, which is basically designed to cross-reference elevation data based on map data versus the information collected from the watch's barometric altimeter. And this somehow got turned on, even though they say that this should be off by default if a device has a barometric altimeter. So if for some reason you see some crazy elevation data on your activity, just make sure to check that this toggles off. And again, the elevation gain collected from the Active 2 itself was good to go, at least for my testing. And then when it comes to heart rate accuracy, so first off, resting heart rate and HRV seem to be good to go like we talked about earlier during sleep tracking, but pretty much all heart rate sensors do a good job when they're still and there's no movement. Where accuracy starts to differ though is going to be for workouts where we're not only increasing our heart rate quite a bit, but also moving around a lot more. So starting out on the easier side of things, let's take a look at some indoor cycling where there's really not many variables for a heart rate sensor to deal with since we're pretty much in a static position the entire time. And the results here were pretty good overall. On a few of the workouts, there were a few spots here or there where I wandered by just a few beats per minute, but those were all momentary and it was almost always in line. Like even on this kind of interesting interval workout right here, other than just a handful of places where it had a few blips, that's incredibly solid. And then when it comes to running, so the Active 2 was actually pretty impressive here, like on this steady state run, and lined up nearly exactly with the external heart rate sensors that I was wearing. That's actually really good. And then for some intervals, again, that's really quite good here, where it tracked not just the steady state portion really well, but it was also quite responsive with quick changes in heart rate with the intervals. Now, where heart rate sensors start to get fumbled though is going to be for stuff like cycling outdoors, as well as more activities that involve a lot of wrist flexion like weight training and high intensity interval training. And when it comes to riding outdoors, so on this right here, not awesome by any means, where it had some points during the workout where it read high, but then on this ride, well, it actually did an okay job for the first half or so, but then got pretty haywire at the end. But the hardest activities for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors to track accurately are going to be for high-intensity interval training as well as weight training. And these are basically just hard activities for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors to track since the sensor is located on your wrist. And that's basically what I saw with the Active 2 is that it had challenges like on the ski erg workout right here. It missed nearly the entire first interval. However, what's kind of interesting here is that the Apple Watch Ultra 2 I was wearing on my other wrist also kind of missed that first interval. But then on the second and third intervals, still some issues here, but then it did settle in and do a better job with the fourth, with a little bit of wandering on the last set. And then here's another ski erg workout where it sort of followed the up and down trends, but the actual accuracy wasn't really there overall. And then when it comes to weight training, so I tested this a bunch and I'm basically seeing the same thing here as well. So I definitely encourage you to use an external heart rate monitor, like a chest strap or an arm heart rate strap, to get the most meaningful results, which the Active 2 can pair to external heart rate monitors, which is a good thing. And that's something you don't really see out of budget fitness watches or things like external sensor support, like heart rate monitors. But something else that you don't really see at this kind of price point is support for more sensors like cycling power meters. Now, something that was missing from the T-Rex 3 when I reviewed that watch was that even though it did collect power for cycling with a power meter, it didn't actually sync that over to Strava, but I'm pretty happy to report that the Amazfit has made that update since my review to now sync over cycling power to Strava. But not only that, it also syncs over running power as well. However, something I noticed about the cycling power being synced over to Strava is that the numbers don't actually line up from the Zepp app to the Strava app, so I haven't really gotten out of that rabbit hole quite yet, but I'll have an update for that in the future. But one more thing too is that cycling power meters also collect cadence. It's actually a metric that's used to calculate power, but it doesn't actually display that in the Zepp app, nor does it feed that information over to Strava either. So I definitely went through this watch with a fine-tooth comb, just like all my other reviews. But like I was mentioning at the beginning of the video, I had to keep that $129 or even $99 price tag in mind while testing it. Does this watch have quirks? Absolutely. But are any of those showstoppers? Well, the hardware actually seems to be solid, and for core functionality, it does all those things pretty darn well. What definitely needs improvement is more on the software side of things when it comes to the algorithms for stuff like sleep tracking, the readiness score, as well as a lot of refinement all around. But this watch has overall been reliable for me, and there's really nothing else that can even come close to it and even double the price. Again, a lot of refinement needs to happen in many areas, but simply put, this is a really good deal for the money. Anyhow, if you have any questions about the Active 2 that I didn't cover in this video, feel free to drop those comments down in the comment section down below. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos just like this that are coming soon. In the meantime, have fun out there, and we will see you in the next video.